Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel, Mormonism with the Murph, where we do a fair and objective analysis of the church and its truth claims, its history, doctrine, and policy. I'm really excited for tonight's episode. On my channel, I have with me a great historian and scholar and a biographer of Joseph Smith, Dan Vogel. Thanks so much for coming on to my channel tonight.
Great to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've asked Dan to come on and to have a discussion. Sort of like the theme or topic of tonight is going to be looking at, the magical worldview, Joseph Smith's Seer stone, his involvement in treasure digging, the Book of Mormon translation. And Dan has done a lot of work. He's done many books on sort of like early church history, on the life of Joseph Smith. You've written, is it an 8-volume series on
Pardon?
is it an 8-volume series that you said that you've done?
Oh, 8 volumes.
Yeah.
That I finished that a few years ago. That was a critical and source critical edition of the Book of of the history of the church. Sorry. So yeah, 8 volumes. You know, the regular 7-volume set that everybody has of Joseph Smith's history. He started it, but it had to be completed after his death by the apostles and church historian George A. Smith. But at first it was Willard Richards and then George A. Smith. But so I did 8 volumes, and the first 6 volumes deals with Joseph Smith, and the 7th volume in the current edition everybody uses was Brigham Young era. So I did the first 6 volumes, and what I wanted to know was what are the sources behind that history. At first, Joseph Smith dictated a lot of it, but then it started becoming a documentary history, where they would just insert letters and other documents along the way with a little bit of commentary in between to connect these documents. And they carried on that way until his death. And they didn't finish it until like 1857. So in Utah. So I wanted to know what were the sources. There's a lot of like hidden sources, like they'll take William Clayton's journal and they'll just insert it. And sometimes they'll change it into Joseph Smith's voice, even though it was William Clayton writing it. So we wanted to know.
In Nauvoo.
Yeah. Well, yeah, he was a scribe. Yeah, but this I'm thinking at this moment of his own personal journal, but he would be describing what Joseph Smith said, like say with the Kinderhook plates, and then it was written in the third person, but they would change it into Joseph Smith saying I did this and I did that. Yes. Instead of Joseph Smith doing it. And
he wasn't fond of writing, was he, Joseph Smith?
No, not really. He liked to dictate most of his stuff.
Yeah,
we have a lot of his writing, though. Every now and then he'd pick up the pen and write in his own journal. Most of the time it's other scribes writing for him, even letters. Sometimes he would write, like if he's writing to Emma, he would write in his own hand, but this, I wanted to know what were the sources, what were the changes. Sometimes when they left stuff out, I would put the paragraph back in bold writing. And all this is free, available right now at archive.org. Signature Books and Smith Pettit Foundation put a lot of their books into archive.org to make them available to the public. So you can find that 8 volumes there for free. And the 5 volumes that I produced way many years ago on the origins of Mormonism, from Joseph Smith's birth up to 1831. I collected everything, and it has more documents than the Joseph Smith collection. This Joseph Smith papers, they focus on Joseph Smith produced items, and I included those not as well edited as they have done. They've done a fantastic job.
Yeah.
But I included those plus what non-Mormons were saying, and or what's in newspapers and all sorts of other places that the Joseph Smith papers didn't include in their limited project.
That's awesome. And I'll put the link in the description where they can find those books. You're also quite famous for you wrote like a biography, Joseph Smith, The Making of a Prophet. Was it early 2000s when you wrote that book?
It was 2004, I think it
Yeah,
was.
yeah.
We were almost made it for the centennial, 2005, right?
Uh,
Uh, so yeah, it's called Joseph Smith, The Making of a Prophet, and that covers the same period as those early Mormon documents that I just mentioned, uh, up to 1831. So it's quite detailed. I go through the Book of Mormon actually in vast detail, talking about possible 19th century influences
mm.
and what how people, the first readers, how the first readers of the Book of Mormon would have read it.
I understood it.
Yeah, and I also go through parts where I think it reflects his own biography
Mm.
and the Smith family and things, psychological things that are clues to Joseph Smith's motivations and uh, his own religious um, viewpoints.
Gotcha. And you've also got a YouTube channel, Dan Vogel, I believe it's called.
Yes. Well,
And
oh
you've
no, it's called. Well, you can search YouTube under my name and get it right away. But I call it um, early Mormonism. Oh, early Mormonism explained. I think
right.
that's.
Okay. Yeah, you've got lots of episodes on there. This topic, Seer Stones, the Glass Liquor trial. You've got some in the First Vision, some
First
really good ones on the
Vision,
Book of Abraham.
Book of Abraham, uh, polygamy,
Yes.
Joseph polyandry. Uh, I explore my interest was at that time was exploring the women that who were already married that Joseph Smith married. Um, anyway, the
Yeah.
priesthood development, how the priesthood developed over time,
Yeah.
translation of the Book of Mormon,
Yeah.
uh,
The
Seer
witnesses, gold
stone,
plates.
the witnesses,
Yeah.
yeah, gold plates.
Yeah. So
Were they gold plates? I explore that question. What was underneath the cloth?
that's awesome. So yeah, I would encourage listeners to go check out Dan Vogel's YouTube channel and his books. I'll put some links in the description so you can read and listen to a lot of his great work that he's done. So Dan, like you're a great historian, you're a scholar, a biographer for Joseph Smith. You would probably be considered a critic. You're not you're not a member of the church, you're not a believer, but you do try. I think you are respected as a historian. You know the documents really well. You stick to the sources and the evidence. Obviously, we all have our own biases, but you would hold sort of like a pious-fraud theory of Joseph Smith, which I believe is you don't
Yeah,
believe he was a prophet, and you believe he might have used some deception at times, but that he sincerely believed that he
yeah,
was inspired. Would that be correct?
yes, yes. That's exactly it.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, I believe that Joseph Smith believed himself to be a prophet and to be inspired in a very general kind of way, not hearing an audible voice of God, that he felt inspired and dictated revelations, and believed that he was even authorized by God to use some deception to convince others of the truthfulness of his revelations.
Almost like the
Um,
ends justify the means, lying for the Lord a little
Sort
bit.
of, yeah, sort of like that lying for the Lord is another way people put it. Pious fraud, though, is a term that was used in Joseph Smith's day, mostly by the deists, who would talk about that there were books in the Bible that were not um, written by the people that were claimed for them, sort of like Deuteronomy. They would say Deuteronomy was a pious fraud because how could Moses write Deuteronomy when it gives an account of his death, at the
That's
end?
right. And
So
also, a
they
lot of
would,
it's not in first person as well, because I've been reading the Old Testament this year, and the first
yeah,
five books that are claimed to be written by Moses, I've realized it's not in first person very much. It's not I Moses, and yeah, he dies in one of the books. You're like, wait a minute, how can he write about his death if he's dead?
yeah. So, so, um, so that creates a problem. The five books of Moses, kind of, and the Book of Mormon mentions the five books of Moses. So that's a problem with some people. But um, the idea that the deists latched onto was who wrote the Deuteronomy, and they believed that the discovery of Deuteronomy in the ruins of the temple when the Jews returned to Jerusalem was a fraud, that it was a book that was written by the priests to carry on the temple, um, responsibilities of the priesthood, and that uh, Ezra, the scribe Ezra, was the true author, and it was a pious fraud to unite the different conflicting versions of Judaism. So, um, at any rate, so maybe Joseph Smith knew about the deists and their attacks on Bible authority, and that his goal was to shore up the Bible, explain why there were so many problems with the Bible, and why there was so much sectarian strife and people debating and arguing about what the Bible really means. And it's because it was altered, by the Catholic Church,
Yeah,
what he
plain and
called the
precious truths were lost.
yeah, the plain and precious things were taken out, and if you had those, it would all be harmonious and perfect. And so he was trying to defend, and I got onto this way of looking at the Book of Mormon, especially uh, from Robert Hollinger. He was a Lutheran minister down in Cincinnati, Ohio, uh, and he wrote a book called Mormon Answer to Skepticism. That was the original title. And then it was republished by Signature Books under a different title. But Robert Hollinger argued that you should read the book. The book, the Book of Mormon tells you its motivation for existing, you know. So he would read all of that, and he would see it as telling you that it was written to defend faith, especially against the deists in the 19th century, and to defend miracles, because the deists
Yeah,
denied miracles. They denied miracles, and the Book of Mormon defended miracles and defended that God is not different. He's the same today, tomorrow,
yeah,
and forever,
still a god of
and
miracles.
still a God of miracles. So, and the Book of Mormon was one of them. You see, this inaugurated the resurgence of miracles, and as it turns out, there was a whole group of people in Europe and America waiting for a restoration of spiritual gifts, and they were called under the term seekers. Now, there was a formal group called Seekers with a capital S kind of seekers in England, and and there were other people under various different names. Some of them were churched and some not. Um, that were seekers, okay, with a small s, and some of them would join churches anyway, but believed that they didn't have the complete truth, but they
Mm.
wanted to community anyway, to belong to a religious community. And Lucy's brother, Jason Mack Smith, and Jason Mack, um, that's Lucy's maiden name. Lucy Smith is Joe Smith's mother.
Yeah,
And uh, her brother, Jason, became a religious seeker and started a communal organization founded in New Brunswick. And there he had like 30 families, and they were organized in a commune situation, sort of like the United Order Joseph Smith later established. And he was he preached and a faith healer. And
Right.
he was a faith healer too. So the Seekers generally believed that after Catholicism, or they believed in a great apostasy similar to Mormons do today, and there was a loss of authority. So they were waiting for a restoration of that authority, but they didn't know exactly how it would happen. Okay. And until that restoration happened, though, they couldn't perform baptism or the sacrament, the Lord's Supper or the sacrament, because no one had authority to do it.
Right.
They would still meet just to be with spiritual people, other kinds of religious minded people that were similar. And they thought, well, how would it be? They were waiting for an apostle or somebody that was sent,
A
right,
prophet. Yeah.
from God. Well, apostle is, being sent
Yes.
by God. So they were waiting for new apostles to be sent with authority. And this would either be, an angel could come and ordain someone, or that would be more of a Catholic kind of restoration of authority to reattach the chain of ordinations, right? Or there would be another like Pentecostal event.
Like an outpouring of the Holy Spirit.
Yes, the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, and that would be the authority. So, long story short, one of my second book, Religious Seekers and the Advent of Mormonism, traces this kind of philosophy or theology or whatever you want to call it into the Mormonism, and that Mormonism started out in this Protestant kind of a concept of authority, and eventually evolved into the Catholic kind of angel coming and ordaining story. So, so that's the religious seekers and the type of authority. What kind of authority? Protestants, especially Alexander Campbell, were Bible literalists. Very strict. The Bible and how they explain their authority for starting a religion was that the Bible contained the authority by recording God's command. Jesus commanded to go out and baptize the world.
Yeah.
That was the authority, that command. Okay. So Joseph Smith came along, and Seekers, that philosophy was that no, you can't just do it on your own. You have to have a revelation of some kind. God has to command you again through revelation to do it. So in the early Mormon experience, it was the revealed commands through Joseph Smith. When he got revelations, it commanded this person to do. This is a book of commandments, right?
Yeah.
It was the commandment. These revealed commandments were the authority by which the early missionaries went out and baptized. There was no story of John the Baptist baptizing or ordaining Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery to baptize. That story was unknown.
Or the first vision.
Until 1834.
Yeah.
The first vision was unknown because it wasn't really a vision. It was I believe that there was a first religious experience that converted Joseph Smith to Jesus in 1820.
Like a born again sort of experience.
Born again experience that eventually evolved into this first vision story that Mormons know so well now through the official history of the church. But yeah, so the first vision, when you read the Articles and Covenants or the section 20 of the Doctrine and Covenants. The Articles and Covenants of the Church, the document upon which the church was founded, does not mention angelic ordinations of any kind. It's the command for Joseph Smith to translate the Book of Mormon and various unmentioned commandments. That it mentions the angel appearing to Joseph Smith. That's when the Mormonism starts. The angel appearing to Joseph Smith, and giving him commandments which inspired him.
Yeah, I remember that
That's
verse.
the authority. And when you get on later, Revelations, or 1829 Revelations, actually not later, but 1829 Revelations, not, this was the 1830 document, the Articles and Covenants. The year before that, there's a revelation that reminds Cowdery that he had been baptized through commandment given to Joseph Smith. And so there's a bunch of other hints that the early Mormons, and this is what David Whitmer talks about later in life, that it was authority, not priesthood. They just knew it as authority, and that they had as much authority before the church was organized as they did after.
That was a big reason he left the church.
They had been commanded. Yeah. So anyway, why introduce angelic ordinations in the mid 1830s? Is because in the early church was founded on charismatic authority, charisma. It's the spirit. Even when you read D&C 20, it talks about the elders are the charismatic leaders of the church, because they will lead the meetings through the spirit. And it's the spirit that gives them authority. They are the spiritual leaders. And it's the spirit. When the early converts in Ohio were baptized, because they were seekers, okay, looking for charismatic authority. They looked to, was there power in the baptism? And so when they were baptized, just like the Book of Mormon says, they come up out of the waters of baptism singing the praises of Jesus, in a new tongue, and so tongues was one of the signs of the presence of the Holy Spirit, just like on Pentecost. So John Murdoch talks all about this in his journal about being baptized, and that he watched carefully Oliver Cowdery and the other three missionaries when they would baptize, to see if there was power in the ordinance, and he saw that power, and so he was convinced. So that was the early Mormons were very different than current Mormons. Current Mormons are very institutionalized, even though there's spiritual experiences that are within the boundaries of the institution.
Yeah, if it's not done by the proper authority, even if it's sincere, it's not viewed as valid in God's eyes.
It's not binding on anyone else.
Yeah.
Right. So in the early church, none of this was in place, none of this institutional boundaries, or I forgot what I was going to say, but the boundaries had not been set, and it was easy to thwart or usurp authority in certain situations and confuse people and lead them away and splinter off into other groups, in Kirtland, Ohio, especially. So there were challengers. Was first Hiram Page.
He had a stone, didn't he? Claiming to receive revelations through a stone.
Yeah. So what happened there was that they wanted more of the mysteries. They wanted more revelations, more knowledge. Where is this Zion going to be built? Where? And they thought it was going to be Fayette. And so Hiram Page Joseph Smith wasn't, satisfying these early followers of charismatic authority, So Hiram Page stepped into the void and started dictating revelations, a whole ream of revelations through this black stone he had. And finally, Joseph Smith, it was kind of like charismatic leader versus charismatic leader in a way, So because there was no institution to solve this problem.
Yeah, no organization or sort of like hierarchy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Joseph Smith had to dictate a revelation specifically for Hiram Page and to condemn his revelations of being inspired by Satan, and to tell Oliver Cowdery, because Oliver Cowdery and the Whitmers were following these revelations, and told them that they had to tell Hiram Page that these were satanic revelations, and so they destroyed them, and they destroyed the stone, and Joseph Smith was able to gain control in that situation again. Right. But it could have easily, gone off into
a bit of chaos.
Group. Yeah, a splinter group. Then it came up again in Ohio with this a woman that we really only in Mormon history is only called Hubble, her last name, but the Joseph Smith papers, people think they know who it is. I can't remember her first name, but doesn't matter, because Joseph Smith got another revelation, and he was handling it individually again, saying that no one is to receive revelations except Joseph Smith. Eventually, Joseph Smith organizes the High Council in 1834, but he has to publish his revelations in order to have a rule of faith, to keep. This is what people are judged by. So in 1831, they start right away to publish the revelations, even though David Whitmer and some others question that. And that was supposed to be the Book of Commandments in Missouri, and that was destroyed. And then finally, the first edition of the Doctrine and Covenants in September 1835. And they have a rule of faith now to judge people by. There's still people that try, but usually now they're handled by the High Council. They don't even get past the High Council, So, right. So that's what I like to do in my history, is to trace the political development, the struggles. Joseph Smith didn't. Everybody just didn't go, "Oh, you're the leader." They sometimes challenged him. Even after this, he gets challenged along the way when he tries to set himself up as the president of the high priesthood. Another challenger was Bishop Edward Partridge. Mm-hmm. Bishop Edward Partridge became bishop in Kirtland, but then when they wanted to start the migration to Independence, Missouri, to Zion, he became bishop there. And he believed that and bishop actually comes from the Disciples of Christ, or Alexander Campbell's movement. I mean, Sidney Rigdon was a bishop in Alexander
know that
movement. Yeah. And so Edward Partridge is also is a former Campbellite, and their view of what a bishop is. Joseph Smith didn't explain it all right away, what a bishop does. And Edward Partridge thought he was in charge in Missouri. And when Joseph Smith went down there on a trip, and Edward Partridge didn't quite thought Joseph Smith was usurping authority on him and his stewardship, right? Edward Partridge actually took his calling very seriously, and wanted to do it just right, and so he didn't want any interference. He didn't, or if Joseph Smith said something he didn't quite agree with, or he didn't think the land that Joseph Smith chose for the temple site was the right place or the best place, he questioned it. Right. And they had a little confrontation, and that lasted for years, actually, but which I trace in great detail in my forthcoming biography of Joseph Smith. I call it the charisma under pressure.
Right.
So it's he's always under this pressure, and how he and organizing and institutionalizing charisma was part of his response to these challenges. So Edward Park, Joseph Smith gets a revelation in November 1831 that basically says that he's the president of the high priesthood. And the high priesthood was organized in Kirtland in June 1831. So there was no president of it yet. They were all high priests.
Okay. Right.
So in the following November, he gets a revelation appointing himself as president of the high priesthood. And it specifically says in there, a bishop is not above the president of the high priesthood.
Okay. So he's putting himself, I'm the prophet, I'm at
Yeah.
the top of the leadership hierarchy.
Right. So, and that wasn't clear. It wasn't like it was president of the high priesthood, but it wasn't clear that he was president of the whole church. That doesn't come until like 1835-ish.
Oh, that's interesting.
And the presidency, the president, and around later, after 1835, he first uses president. He specifically uses in a letter to Missouri, president of the whole church. that comes later. So at this time, it's just president of the high priesthood, and Partridge is kind of put in his place. But yet then after that, when Joseph Smith leaves, he goes to Missouri and gets ordained. He gets ordained as president of the high priesthood in Ohio, then goes to Missouri and gets sustained as president of the high priesthood in Missouri. And they all did it, and they all left with shaking hands and everything. But by the time he got home, there were already letters coming saying that he was trying to assert authority over everybody, monarchical authority, and
right.
They had second thoughts on the whole thing.
And they probably saw it as later developments. I suppose a believer could interpret it as, perhaps it's, revelation doesn't come all at once, line upon line, and figuring things out. But probably to some of the members and maybe some of the leaders or the witnesses at the time, they maybe saw it as he's just developing things and trying to give himself more power and authority and more control over the church. That may be how they saw it.
Yes, but it was in Joseph Smith's mind, it was necessary. The events are forcing him into this category. Okay.
Yes.
This is where I draw on sociology, and sociologist, very famous sociologist named Max Weber, or he's German, Austrian, Max Weber. Okay. And Max Weber, he wrote a very important work in around the turn of the 20th century. It's quite old now, but it's become a standard. And it was called From Charisma to Institution.
Okay.
So he traced charismatic groups, and it's not necessarily religious groups. It could be political groups. It could be businesses.
Yes.
Lots of groups. Okay. So they start off very charismatically, and even early Christianity started off very charismatically with a charismatic leader, personality. But if it is to survive, see, it's very volatile and is liable to split off into other charismatic groups when there's ever a dispute. So to survive, it has to institutionalize. It's just inevitable, according to Max Weber, if it survives. And it becomes, rather than the charisma of a person, it becomes the charisma of office.
Or authority or position.
Yeah. Oh, there's the president of the church, right? It's the office that gives is the charismatic entity now, right? So if so, like you've heard, familiarity breeds contempt, kind of thing. Well, as they get to know Joseph Smith, right, he becomes less and less up there, as this unapproachable leader. He becomes more and more human, and it becomes more and more difficult to maintain this, charismatic persona, even though he does have it to some degree anyway.
Yes.
But they start seeing flaws, and they also know his language, and they know the revelations are in his language, right? And so he has to slowly bring them along to realize that revelation is in his language, in his weakness, given in his weakness.
Doesn't it say that? Is it in the first section of the Doctrine and Covenants that the Lord
Yeah,
speaks unto men sort of like in their language, to their understanding, in their weakness?
yeah, in the preface.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, 1833 preface. That was supposed to go with the Book of Commandments, but it didn't. It wasn't able to. But then they challenged Joseph Smith. Oh, you can't publish these revelations, because they have all these problems. They're flawed. And then there's that challenge. You try to produce the least of these revelations, and if you can't, you have to testify. You have to, because they had like the Book of Mormon had testimony. They had the testimony of the elders to the revelations in front of the Book of Commandments, or Doctrine and Covenants. It became so. There was that showdown. The big problem there was not that, because these other men did have a better command of language. Joseph Smith had an amazing command of language, actually, even though it wasn't, learned in that style. Actually, learning would probably get in the way, but it was what I call a rough eloquence. He still had the power of language. I mean, how can you be charismatic if, in this stage of the operation anyway, without having some command of the language? It just goes hand in hand with charisma. So he had this rough eloquence, but the one barrier that these learned men had was that they could not imitate God's language. It was blasphemy. This, like, how can you pretend even for a moment to speak like your God?
Some of the revelations do read like that. They're sort of like in the voice or the name of the Lord.
Well, Joseph Smith's Liberty Jail letters lapse into deity, the voice of deity right in the middle of the letter.
So they start in Joseph Smith's voice and then
go to
God's
and they
voice.
Those parts become sections like 121, 22, 23. Anyway, so this is what Max Weber gave us, was this inevitable evolution into institutionalization. And it was that innovation, Joseph Smith's innovations to improvise and build this institution as needed as he went along. That's his true genius. I mean, he's survived a lot of failure.
Yes.
Because of it. Because he succeeded in a way that when he was dictating the Book of Mormon, he never dreamed of, So that's why he survives, and other charismatic figures in the past are just long forgotten. There's so many prophets, failed prophets, or prophets that disappear into, or the mists of time, that there's a lot.
Wow.
that you never even heard of. I mean, the list goes on actually, but
That's fascinating. Wow.
so prophets are basically dime a dozen. You know what I mean? They come along and they're created by people. Charisma is a creation of both the charismatic leader and the followers. So the followers need a leader, and the leader needs followers. And the leader, the followers, and this is charismatic leaders of all kinds. Okay, this is the psychology of charisma. Okay, they need themselves reflected back from the audience to tell them who they are, and in return, the leader reflects back what the audience needs, and there's a symbiosis. And charisma is a what you would call a social construction.
Hmm. Because you were saying that there was people who were seekers at that time. They were waiting for, the true restored church, or waiting for an apostle or a prophet.
Yeah. So Sidney Rigdon's group had left Campbellism because Campbell didn't believe in the restoration of spiritual gifts.
Ah,
And Sidney Rigdon and some of the others in his congregation, they all left Campbellism before they joined Mormonism. So they were looking for, they already had all things in common. A family, there was a family off to the east of Kirtland, the Morley, Isaac Morley's family, what they called they called it the family. And that's where Joseph Smith went to live. And that's where all these spiritual excesses took place after Cowdery and the missionaries went on from Kirtland to Missouri.
yeah.
They were in October, they left New York and passed through Kirtland because one of the missionaries with Cowdery was Parley P. Pratt. And Parley P. Pratt had come from that area looking, or he was on a missionary journey actually into New York. He wasn't looking for anything like Mormonism, but he stumbled on it and then investigated it and then was converted. And when Cowdery and these other three men, one of them being Parley P. Pratt, were assigned to go on a mission to find the New Jerusalem, the site of the New Jerusalem, and to rear a pillar where the temple is to be built, except they never managed that. And to preach to the Indians, like the Book of Mormon predicted.
Yeah, the Lamanites.
The Lamanites, yeah. So when they left New York in October of 1830, just after the church had been organized in New York, I'll say New York right now. I won't get into an argument over where it was, but so Parley P. Pratt said, let's go by Kirtland and preach there on our way. And they stopped there, and they actually stopped a couple of months and baptized hundreds of people because they were all looking for a restoration of spiritual gifts. And they had a prophet, that was speaking directly to God. So
They were golden investigators, you could say.
well, and they had a book. Here's new revelation, right? And so they read it and they got converted, and the rest is history there. Mm-hmm. So then another group, where the revelations keep saying the field is white, ready to harvest.
Yeah, that's referenced a lot.
About basically, when missionaries are finally sent to England in 1837, they run into a group of people called the Brethren. And the Brethren are the same. They are like seekers. They didn't go under the name of seeker, but they are looking for a charismatic restoration. And just the Mormonism filled that bill. And they were converted in droves also, and eventually migrated to America.
Wow.
So yeah, it's all through Europe, and a lot of unchurched people didn't believe in the current organized religions, and were waiting for something different, more, spirit filled, not just having the form thereof, but the power.
Yes.
That's the key scripture that rung in their ears.
That's interesting. Awesome. Right. So I think we could talk all day about so many aspects of church
Oh
history.
yeah,
Um, before we dive,
fascinating topic.
it's really, isn't it? So fascinating. And we're going to be going more to like the roots, the beginnings,
Yeah.
and what we're going to discuss. I've done a series on this, and the church even, I would say, acknowledges now, on their gospel topics essay on the Book of Mormon translation, they have an essay, Joseph the Seer. Even if you go on Fair Latter-day Saints, which is a faithful apologetic website, they acknowledge, Joseph Smith's involvement in magic. You have Seer Stone, which he used in treasure digging and for translating the Book of Mormon. We're going to dive in a lot deeper, I think, in our discussion. You're sort of quite an expert when it comes to the documents and the chronology, and we can look at the credibility of the sources in the accounts, but it's something that's not really, it's acknowledged now by the church, by both faithful and unfaithful historians. So the things that we'll be discussing are, you could say, factual or historical, but we're not really going to be, this discussion, we talked about this earlier, we're not trying to say, whether or not Joseph Smith is a prophet or not. You can still, acknowledge all this history and this data and these documents, but still hold a faithful interpretation, or still believe he's a prophet, like some do, like Richard Bushman and Terrell Givens, and there's lots of people who know this and still believe
Mike
he was a
Quinn,
prophet. Yeah, yeah.
he's the
The Michael
expert
Quinn.
on the. He was until he passed away recently,
Yeah.
and a friend of mine actually.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we agreed to disagree, kind of friendship we had, but um, yeah, he got really interested in the early Mormonism and the magic worldview, and wrote a book, the first book length treatment on the subject, um, and that he expanded later. The expanded version of his book dealt with a lot of the apologists who were still trying to resist.
Trying to
Uh,
deny.
yeah, trying to deny, trying to resist, trying to minimize nuance or whatever the information away. Most of the apologists, though, have come around to have some sort of nuanced position on this, but there is a group of apologists that have kind of gone backwards to the more complete denial of everything.
They use the Seer Stone in Treasure Digging, the Book of Mormon
Yeah, he
translation, and
never used the Seers stone. The 1826 trial never happened. Uh, all the Hurlbut affidavits are to be lies. They're all lies. And
and even some of the faithful sources, like Martin Harris, David Whitmer, Emma Smith, and we'll talk about this more later, but they talk about how Joseph Smith used that seer stone in translating the Book of Mormon,
yeah,
but in a miraculous way, that they believed it was divine, that it was by the power of God. So they're not trying to discredit Joseph, but they would still deny some of those statements and those witnesses of the Book of Mormon translation.
yeah. There's some try to deny. Well, some people have tried, or some what I call very conservative, fundamentalist, literalist Mormons try to keep everything pure and simple as they learned it in primary. And
So like the whitewash, sanitized narrative that
yeah,
most
and
of us
and
grew up with.
yeah, anything they don't like, they only accept anything that comes directly from the presidency, which is difficult now. that they've written these papers and put them on the internet. The church has put these.
Do you mean the Joseph Smith papers or the gospel topics
Well, the
essays?
Joseph Smith papers, the gospel topic papers. Now you have the leadership actually admitting all this, so it's very difficult.
There's even a video, I believe, of President Nelson that I watched, talking to a group of primary children about the Book of Mormon translation, and he had the Seer stone in the hat and he talked about it. So there you have even our prophet
Yeah.
acknowledging it.
Now, my friend Mike Quinn, he, of course, was a believer.
Yes.
And he knew all of this stuff and admitted all this stuff, even more than he wasn't. I'm probably more conservative about the sources than he was.
Right.
Okay. So
you're a bit more skeptical of some accounts.
I'm more critical or skeptical of the sources. I don't reject, historians don't reject categorically any document, especially if it's backed up by other documents. They don't just go, oh, this person's untrustworthy, throw it out. They don't, historians don't do that. They don't go, oh, this is a believer, we keep it in. No, historians are just as skeptical about believing documents as they are about hostile documents.
I suppose it's confirmation bias, isn't it? We want to only hear those sources or those accounts that support or strengthen our position or our beliefs, and anything that might attack it, even if there's multiple evidences or sources that corroborate, we just want to discredit them.
Right. So you always have to be thinking of what position this person was in. There could be a believer that wasn't in position to know the information they're trying to give. And then there could be a non-believer that I was an eyewitness.
Yeah, so they could be just as unreliable, even if they're a faithful believer.
Which one do you believe? Because the other one said, I saw this, or Martin Harris told me this. Now they might get it slightly wrong because an outsider sometimes can get confused about things.
Mm-hmm. And they might not be writing it down until years later, so it could be late recollections.
Well, do you believe somebody that might be a little critical that is writing in 1830 and somebody that's a believer that's writing in 1890?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
big memory,
it's
big memory loss.
Kind of have this is a critical historical methodology that you have to like school yourself in, so you can try to weigh and balance each document and each part of the document, because some person might be they might be critical, give testimony, but there's a bunch of other people saying the same thing. Like Mike Quinn, he emphasized in his treatment of early Mormonism and the Magic Worldview that a lot of these non-Mormon sources were backed up by faithful Mormon sources that are not that well known, like Joseph Knight Sr.'s history. Joseph Knight Sr. from Colesville. He was a fellow money digger with the Smiths.
An early convert.
And an early convert. Well, yeah, he was an early convert. It didn't stop him from joining. Actually, the Magic Worldview is something that they were blind to. You know what I mean? They didn't know they had it. They didn't like say, oh, they didn't have the categories separated like we do, It
was part of their culture and it was their world, their mindset. And that's a good segue. I think before we even talk about Joseph Smith and his involvement in magic, maybe you could give a bit of a background or context about the magical worldview in general in, like the 18th, 19th century that many people in, frontier America had.
Well, how many people do you know that are Christians that check their horoscope? They don't, the average person out there, only a very hardened, kind of fundamentalist prone Christian would, start criticizing them on that. A lot of average Christians out there, the run of the mill, let's say, Christians out there don't even know that they're doing something that might be frowned on by the more orthodox.
Or considered like magical, or yeah.
Right. So this was the Smiths and the people that they hung around with. And there was a whole Richard Bushman wrote an article on the visionary culture.
Yes.
Which it was, there was a subculture in a way of people that have visionary experiences. Even in the mainstream at revivals, people were experiencing religious phenomena. Okay. And they didn't have all the categories that we have. We have Christians today that do that. Other Christians think that they're more psychological explanations, today, even today. There's Christians over here having faith healings and revivals and speaking in tongues, and then there's these other people over here that don't believe in that. So there's different Christians today, and there were different Christians in Joseph Smith's day.
Right. Okay.
And
so some Christians believed in magic and would have believed in like seer stones,
well,
divining rods.
I've used the term, and it sets off some of these Orthodox people, of Christian magic. The magicians, the books that you read about, these I'm trying to think of the title of the book right now. Barrett's Magus. The guy's a Christian magician. It's white magic, not black magic. It's not to be confused with Satanism.
Right. They still believe it's of God, and it's just kind of like how the world works.
Well, it's a pseudo-scientific view, meaning it's the same thing with like rods. Is it only atheists and devil worshippers that use rods today? No. Nobody has those kind of categories except an Orthodox Christian. Okay.
Got you.
Not everyone thought God moved the rod. They thought there was a scientific principle behind it, that it worked through magnetism. The water attracts the water in the rod, the willow. There's a scientific principle. There's waves coming up out of the ground. Even today, some people will give this explanation. Okay.
Like a compass.
Yeah. Here you go. So that's a good analogy. So the rod works by scientific principles that mainstream scientists don't recognize, but yet is real. So there's a lot of people that have that position. Doesn't make them evil.
Got you.
So Joseph Smith is in that culture, and the stone, seer stones, it also mixed in with all of that are fraudulent people, to be sure.
Right. Yeah.
There's sincere magicians, there's fraudulent magicians, and in order to maintain some their experiences, why it doesn't always work, they have reasons. Just like we have a whole slew of psychics today that give out predictions that only, on the average become true. They highlight the ones that come true and don't ever mention the ones that didn't come true. So they'll highlight, and humans are built this way. The confirmation bias thing.
Yeah. Humans
are built this way. So it's part of my training. I mentioned in the preface of my biography of Joseph Smith, the making of a prophet, that as a teenager in my early 20s, also I did magic as a hobby, and I read a lot of books on magic too. And magicians talk a lot about, especially if you're a big fan of Houdini like me. Houdini was one of my heroes as when I was growing up, and he spent the latter part of his life exposing fake mediums, spiritualist mediums who would produce raps on tables. The spirits would rap out messages, one for yes and two for no, kind of a situation. Or they would have and later they would have seances, and the room would be dark. People would be holding their hands so that everybody know, and touching feet so nobody knows anybody. There are no people being able to move about the room, yet objects that were set on the table would float, and tambourines would shake, and there would be chalk messages written on a board in the dark, chalkboard. They would put two school children used to use in those early late 1800s and early 20th century would use these little chalkboards to write on, and they would put a chalk on one and put the two chalkboards together, and the spirit would write out a message.
Oh.
And so and sometimes some spirit mediums would produce an actual spirit, and then they called it ectoplasm, and it was really cheesecloth, but they would see it floating in the room. Anyway, Houdini went around exposing these mediums as frauds. And so I read a lot of that kind of stuff, and learned how psychics do their readings of people as if they know them, or talk. They like Jonathan Edwards, let's say, he would pretend like a spirit of your ancestor is here talking to him. He would say, oh, somebody in the audience, I get a strong impression of a J, oh, that's me. Somebody would stand up.
Right. It's quite vague, isn't it? It could apply to anybody, right?
So they would do stuff like, and they would lead them through a bunch of things. But Jonathan Edwards, if you watch the tape back, he would be wrong, right, wrong, right. And the people would forget about all those wrong ones. And afterwards, just remember the right ones. Then they would say, in the process of this, what is called cold reading, in the process, the person, Jonathan Edwards, would say, so they died. When they died, it was about the chest. Well, everybody stops breathing. So it's about this, something about the chest. Oh, yeah, he died of a heart attack. Well, if you question that person later, they would go, Jonathan Edwards knew that my uncle, Jay, had died from a heart attack.
Yeah.
Okay.
But did he really? Yeah.
Well, so Jonathan Edwards didn't say the guy died of a heart attack. The person that was being read provided that information. And they confused it as part of what Jonathan Edwards had said. Well, in studying the methods of these people, you become quite skeptical, and you can figure out what's going on in the historical records somewhat. It's hard because the people that are fooled can't record it exactly how it happened. They only record what they thought as they interpreted what happened.
So they don't know how the magician did the trick, so to speak.
They were fooled.
Yeah.
And part of the illusion is created by the person being read. So, for example, when you read in the historical record, in the 1826 trial record in South Bainbridge, March 1820, 1826, in South Bainbridge, Joseph Smith, after he went down to Harmony, Pennsylvania with Josiah Stoll, And then after that had ended and went back up to South Bainbridge with Josiah Stoll and continued looking for treasures around that area. Finally, one of Josiah Stoll's relatives took him to court.
Yeah.
And fraud, not as a fraud, but as a stone gazer. And at the time, under disorderly persons, it was also called the Vagrant Act. But
Was
under
it considered illegal or more fraud?
yes,
It
yes,
wasn't legal. Okay.
but it was the type of law that no one did anything about, because it's people doing it amongst themselves, causing no harm would be ignored. But when Joe Smith's getting money for doing it, that's a whole different ball game.
Okay. Right.
And so it was there on the laws, and hardly anybody would bother, hey, that guy, to bother somebody doing it, trying to find treasure, or various other things. It has a very vague definition that would include both stone gazing or scrying, as they called it, and water witching, and all that. It was very, very rarely used, and I only know of one other instance. I haven't really looked thoroughly, but it was a man called Ransford Rogers over there near Utica, New York. Actually, was put in jail over it.
Oh, wow.
He had a fraud scheme going, which is a whole nother story. But which is it is this. So I should tell it. He would go into town. Well, before going into town, he would take some coins and bury them. And then
Right.
he would go into the saloon or bar or grog house or whatever, and start bragging about his ability with a wad or rod. And finally, somebody would say, hey, old man so and so didn't believe in banks. He buried his money and is on his property somewhere. He died. Nobody knows where it is. Maybe you could find it with your rod, And so he would say, well, that kind of treasure probably has a curse on it, and I need a much stronger rod. And I take subscriptions, we'll have subscriptions to the form a company and give me money, and then I would go to the East and get the proper tools to do it. But I'll give you an example of my power. And he would go out, he would take his rod, and he would find these coins, and that would increase everybody. That would be, you would refer to that as like greasing the well, kind of like getting everybody's confidence up,
building their confidence in him that he can. And it'd be a
confidence treasure. This is a confidence scheme, right? Where you find a little bit, you promise a lot, and people just go in on it, sort of like a patent medicine using a stooge to pretend like they were healed or something, or test a fake testimonial. And you could even get real testimonials after a while anyway. But so he would collect the money and then just disappear.
Right.
Finally caught up with them, and they put him in jail for a while. And it was a famous case. And some newspapermen compared Joe Smith to Ransford Rogers. That's how I know about him, actually.
I'm guessing this was before the 1826 trial?
Ransford Rogers, yes. I believe his thing happened before the 1826 trial. I can't remember the exact dates. I think he was like very early, but people remembered it as a famous case.
Right.
So Joseph Smith got down into Harmony, Pennsylvania when Josiah Stoll came. Josiah Stoll had heard Joseph Smith had these abilities.
Yeah.
As it turns out, he had a son that lived in Manchester. And that's probably how he learned about Joseph Smith. Uh,
Right.
a son, uh, Simpson Stoll, lived in Manchester and probably wrote his father about it. And Josiah Stoll had spent the previous summer of before 1825. So let's back up a little bit.
Yeah. So I've got a question. So
Yeah, go ahead.
this sort of magical worldview, this sort of magical folklore culture, was there a lot of people who believed in it and participated in it, and they believed in things like, treasure that was guarded by spirits, that was sort of like had
Yeah,
enchantments, they would have engaged in
yeah,
magical rituals, used objects like seer stones, divining rods. How prevalent was that in sort of
very,
19th
very.
century America?
It's very prevalent. A non-Mormon by the name of Alan Taylor, who studied the magic and eventually got onto Mormonism because of the Mark Hoffman uh,
Salamander letter.
fiasco. uh, and his salamander letter, and everybody, even Quinn, that's when everybody hopped on the subject and started taking it seriously, and digging for more information. Although that turned out to be fraudulent,
Yeah.
it did cause historians, Mormon and non-Mormon, to dig deeper into the subject. Well, Alan Taylor, he collected all these stories, treasure digging stories from all over the United States. I mean, it's in Europe as well. Um, it comes from Europe, from the mines, the mining culture in Europe, and folklore. It comes under it should be studied under the heading of folklore, you
Hmm.
know, urban myths kind of folklore, that kind of stuff. Well, um,
And wasn't there
so
tales of Captain Kidd? That a lot of it
yeah,
was like treasure. Could you talk a little bit about who he is and
yeah. Robert Kidd, he was a pirate and eventually caught and hanged. I mean, in I forget, London. Um, so it's
was this
late
17th, 18th
1700s.
century? Okay.
Yeah. Um, so the tale was that Captain Kidd, uh, buried his treasure on the shore along the Atlantic shore of America, United States. And so treasure digging was more prevalent along that shore. But the people that were inland kind of started trying to tap into that lore also by saying that Captain Kim maybe didn't bury it on the shore. Maybe he buried his treasure upstream. So they were they would along streamways that connected to the Atlantic anyway. Uh, Various people would be digging for Captain Kidd's treasure along there. It wasn't just Captain Kidd's treasures that they were looking for either. So it didn't have to be along the streamways that they were treasure diggers digging for money. Like they were digging for people that they thought had buried treasure in their on their property somewhere. Um, or they would be just looking for gold deposits, silver deposits, salt. They look for salt. They look for water. Um, they look for lost objects, stolen objects.
Is that
Uh,
people who used a divining rod or a seer
yeah,
stone?
yeah. So one aspect of why it was so popular, and to claim that you had in your family a seer or seeress, was to scare thieves away.
Right.
That because if people would steal something, they'd be afraid that the seer, this great seer in your family, would track it down to their house, and or their property, and there it would be. And and that was in Europe as well. That's what I read, that in a European source, that a good seer or rod worker was better than having real strict laws. Better than a magistrate
They
at
could catch the thief.
at keeping property.
Mm, right.
So in Smith's neighborhood, there was a lot of um, claims of theft, and there were like maybe about 6 seers in that one neighborhood.
Yeah, see, that's something that I found interesting because whenever I first found out about the seer stone that Joseph Smith used, the seer stone, I didn't. One guy did say to me on my mission about it. He was some random stranger, and I didn't know what he was on about. But it was age 22 that I discovered that Joseph Smith used the seer stone. But I thought that was probably unique to Joseph Smith, and I found it interesting. Realized that there was actually other people in his area claiming to be seers and to see through a stone. So it wasn't just exclusive to Joseph.
Well, I I didn't know Joseph Smith used a seer stone until probably after my mission, when I was reading David Whitmer's pamphlet, All Believers in Christ, and he mentioned the seer stone and Joseph Smith. But before that, even before I went on my mission, I read Lucy Smith's history, and she was talking about Sally Chase, finding the location where the plates were hidden in the cooper's shop by using a seer stone, a green seer stone. And I thought, hold it. What?
Yeah,
I knew Joseph Smith had the Urim and Thummim, and he could see things with it. But here's a lady that is using a green stone, and she actually finds the location of the plates, but the plates have been moved by Joseph Smith because he had a premonition. But still, how is it that where did this lady get this stone? I mean, what?
and then
You know?
Hiram Page had a stone. So there's
Yeah, and
other
Hiram
seers.
Page had a stone, and I just kind of put that back on the shelf. I didn't know what to do with that information really. You know, so
And Lucy Smith does she acknowledges, I believe, in her history that the family, they believed in magic. Does she talk about how they were engaged in was it the faculty of Abrac, if I remember the quote right, that they believed in like
yeah,
the
well,
seances and
I didn't know about that quote until probably Quinn, about the time he wrote that book, because that's in the rough draft of Lucy's history.
oh, okay, not the published or
Right.
final draft.
Yeah. The rough draft. There's a preliminary draft of Lucy when she's dictating to um, um, Margaret Howard. Howard. Anyway,
Anyway,
Howard, his brother and sister, and uh, Howard. Anyway, um, she dictated it to this lady who wrote it down, and then it was smoothed out. Howard Corey, excuse me, Margaret and Howard Corey.
you knew there was
Yeah,
hard.
yeah. So Corey, it was Corey. Mar Margaret Corey and Howard Corey was just Smith's scribe in Nauvoo. In 1845, after Joseph Smith's death, Lucy started dictating his history to Margaret, I think that's her name, Corey. And then it was smoothed out into an actual text, which then Orson Pratt published.
Right.
So anyway, so that it's in the rough draft that mentions the faculty of Abrac, and so I didn't see that part, magic circles and soothsaying and all that. And then the magic parchments. There are these 3 magic parchments that were handed down in the Smith family. They have magical characters and things on them. And those were handed down in the Smith family with a tradition of, that they were family heirlooms.
So the
And
Smiths
much
were
of,
very much immersed in this sort of magical culture,
yeah,
and they participated in it. And
yeah.
I believe
And the
you,
whole, when we get to it, the whole Book of Mormon story, coming forth of the Book of Mormon stories told in this culture, which is the reason why it made so much sense, which is the reason why Joseph Smith's former money digging companions in Palmyra and Manchester believed the story too. It made total sense to them. They believed there were gold plates in the hill, and they actually went and tried to dig them out.
and they believed in like treasure guardians or guardian
Yeah.
spirits who
So
guarded the treasure.
so now back to Captain Kidd. Now, the folklore was that Captain Kidd had buried the treasure and went, and when he did, he cut the throat of one of his men and threw the body in with the treasure
For
trunk.
that account.
Yeah, and that the spirit of that man stayed there with the treasure and haunted the treasure and protected the treasure, would scare people away from the treasure if they ever tried to dig it up. So what I was going to mention was that the waterways, and one of them was that maybe Captain Kidd went up the Susquehanna River. And the Susquehanna River goes through Harmony, Pennsylvania. This is this river that Joseph Smith and Albert Cadby baptized themselves in. And it's the river that the house that Joseph Smith lived in was right, within feet of this river. And they believe that in 1825, when Joseph Smith was hired by Josiah Stoll to go there, and he had dug in the previous year, he had dug there without success, and they were using a seeress named Odal. This lady, seeress Odal. Odal had located the treasure, or this what they call the silver mine. There's probably a cave with the treasure put in the cave. She had located it. They had dug a giant hole without success, and they finally get in. And it Josiah Stoll wasn't the first to dig on this hill either. There were two previous digs at the same location without success. So,
So there's
but
lots
they
of these tales
imagined,
and sort of myths people believed
yeah.
there's treasure
So
buried along there.
they had imagined that the the pirates had gone up to Susquehanna and stopped there and dug a hole and buried this treasure in it, and it was enchanted. And so when Josiah Stoll went and hired Joseph Smith to take him there in November, so he had dug on it the summer before this November 1825, or October, came in October, but in November they finally got there in November. And when they got there in November, I think it was the 11th, if I'm not mistaken, they signed a contract there. And this is where Joseph Smith met Isaac Hale,
And Emma.
Emma Hale's father, because some of the money diggers were boarding with him.
That's right. Is it okay if we back up a wee bit, Dan? I definitely want to
Go
talk
ahead.
about Josiah Stoll and get to that. I want to try to
Yeah,
follow a bit of
I
a
hope people can
timeline.
follow this because we're
I
bouncing
know.
around a
I
little
want to try
bit.
to have a bit of a structure here. You're very charismatic, and I'm trying to organize things. So so the Smiths were very much immersed in this, magic folklore. Am I right in thinking, did Joseph Smith Sr., did he have a divining rod himself? Joseph
Yes,
Smith's father?
some of the people that lived around the Smiths, around their Manchester farm, before the Smiths didn't buy the Manchester farm until later, or contract for it until later, but they lived in a cabin near it before they purchased it.
Yeah.
And during that time, 1820, 1819, 1820-ish, they were living in this cabin, and during that time, Joseph Smith Sr. Is said to have used a rod. He's also said to have brought that practice with him from Vermont. But the sources that state that, I'm very skeptical of. But the same sources mention Oliver Cowdery's father, William Cowdery, used a rod and was associated with a group called the Wood Scrape, the wood company that used the rod for various reasons. They were kind of like American Israelites, kind of a pseudo religion kind of group that used the rod, but it became known as the Wood Scrape in Wells, Vermont.
Did Oliver Cowdery as well? Did he use?
Yes.
He used the divining rod. I remember
Yeah.
in I think it's Doctrine and Covenants section 8, and it's been changed now to say that he has the gift of iron. And I remember reading that as a missionary,
Yes.
thinking, what on earth does that mean? Because I thought the gift of iron was like being a spokesperson for Joseph Smith, but then it talks about how he can hold it in his hands and
Yeah.
it can move. And then I was like,
And it has
didn't
told you many things.
yes, and it didn't make any sense to me. And I didn't realize that in the early book of commandments, because the revelation was changed, that it was the gift of the rod, and then it was
Yes.
later changed to the gift of iron.
That's
And
exactly.
that clarified so much for me.
Yeah. Well, I just thought, well, maybe he had some kind of rod. Where did it go? I didn't connect it with water witching rod or forked rod or whatever kind of rod he used.
Did they believe they could find treasure with the divining rod as well?
Treasure, but it sounds like Oliver Cowdery got messages somehow. Probably yes and no.
Communication. Right.
Yeah, probably yes and no questions.
Uh-huh.
You ask a
Okay.
question and the rod dips or it doesn't dip, you know.
Right.
Um, so the earliest manuscript version calls it, the rod of nature, right? The early manuscripts said the sprout of nature. So, which kind of alludes to it being it has to be a young branch, of a tree, and usually a willow tree. And then it was changed to rod of nature. Then it was changed to the rod of Aaron to disguise it. So in the mid 20s, as we talk, if we have enough time, because you see, everything's a huge subject
It
here.
is, isn't it? We want to
Um,
be concise, but we also want to be thorough and
oh, it's just
talking to
impossible. It's impossible. Everything, it takes some kind of explanation and then further nuances and things that apologists want to attach to it. But so there is a concerted effort for Joseph Smith to evolve his story from the treasure digging lore that it came from to a more mainstream Christian story, because he was becoming, well, he was blind to it to begin with. Then as Horobot and others, people, even in 1831, they started mentioning there was like an affidavit of former neighbors, unnamed, because it was published in the Painesville Telegraph. It was signed by several, I forget how many, residents of Palmyra or Manchester,
and
talking about this money digging, and
it was
even
putting
Abner
Mormonism
Cole.
unveiled, wasn't it?
Pardon?
It was putting Mormonism unveiled. Isn't that the first
Yeah, Mormonism.
anti-Mormon
Yeah, that's
book? Or
published. That's published in 1834. But E.D. Howe, the publisher, was also the editor of the Painesville Telegraph, which is near Kirtland, Ohio. And in 1831, he was before he even met Hurlbut, he was already researching Mormonism because his wife had joined and sister-in-law. And so he was already writing letters to Palmyra, probably to Abner Cole, who Abner Cole was, Abner Cole started a newspaper called the Palmyra Reflector, and he had set the type on the same press in Grandin's printing shop where he was printing the Book of Mormon. And he started publishing excerpts from the Book of Mormon, and then Joseph asserted his copyright and made him stop. But so they had a little tiff. But Abner Cole knew about Joseph Smith before the Book of Mormon. He knew Abner Cole knew Joseph Smith as a money digger in the Palmyra area, and the reason why he knew was because he owned one of the hills that Joseph Smith was digging on.
Right.
And the people living on the land at the time were renting from Abner Cole, and that was the Saunders family, Lorenzo and Benjamin Saunders, the two brothers that knew the Smiths and went to school with the Smiths. Their father, Enoch Saunders, owned the land and allowed them to dig on this hill called, it's now called, well, not now, now it has no name that I know of, but after, in the 40s, 1840s, it became known as Miners Hill because the Miner family owned it. And a very long cave was dug into the side of this, on the eastern side of this hill, in 1825. 1823, actually, it started, the whole fiasco started.
Okay.
1823, before Alvin died.
Right.
Alvin and Willard Chase dug on the hill at Walters, the magician's instructions. Luman Walters, and this is where Luman Walters came in. And Abner Cole wrote all about Walters the magician in his Palmyra Reflector.
So was it 1823 when Walters came to talk? Well, maybe let's talk about Joseph Smith Seer Stone.
You can go all over the place.
Yeah, I'm trying to go in a timeline. Oh,
it all connects together,
doesn't it? I want to try to follow a bit of chronology.
It's not all nice and neat. Like,
no,
some people want to say Joseph Smith dug treasure up until the Mormon thing started, and then he stopped, and he repented or whatever and went on. No, it bleeds into each other.
Yeah,
it blends into each other. It's hard to separate the two things. It's not so easily separated or categorized.
Yeah,
and that's why we're having difficulty here
trying to talk
about one or the other, or before this, and so Joseph Smith Sr. did use a rod, and he they dug for treasure at Joseph Smith Sr.'s direction, actually, first on the hill on the Smith's property. There's a long hill behind the house, the frame house. There's a long hill. You can't exactly see it because it's covered with forest. But at one time it was totally bald. But and you can see that in some early pictures. The hill's totally exposed. But they first dug on that hill, and a man named William Stafford, who lived a couple miles or a mile south on Stafford Road, lived a mile south of the Smiths on a farm there, who also sons had seer stones themselves, and but they participated in money digging episodes with the Smiths on the Smith property and on the Stafford property. And Hurlbut went and interviewed these guys. These are his neighbors. So historians are very interested in these documents, although a lot of people try to smear them because they came from Philestus Hurlbut. but Felicitas Hurlbut only interviewed these people. We don't know if they wrote it down or Hurlbut wrote it down for them as they explained it, but they signed them. And they were published during these people's lifetime, and they never denounced their testimonies. So to a historian, the fact that it was written, published, and nobody complained about the version of their testimony gives it a lot of credence to a historian who doesn't care who it comes from, really.
I suppose they're claiming that they knew the Smiths, they would have seen these things happening, so they would have been sort of eyewitnesses.
Now,
yeah, and participants.
Now they may have left parts out, like William Stafford talked about. He did participate. Some others wouldn't, like Willard Chase wouldn't exactly own up to the fact that his sister had a stone and that he dug at his sister's direction. He never mentioned Walters the magician or anything like that, so yeah, he might have been embarrassed later, mostly because Willard Chase was a Methodist lay minister himself.
I have a question about that, because I know today that Christians would view, engagement in magic, or, there's a scripture in Deuteronomy that sort of condemns, I think it's Deuteronomy, like sorcery, witchcraft, anything like that.
Necromancy.
Yeah.
Necromancy, especially be talking to dead people, is forbidden in the Old Testament, but they didn't have those kind of that didn't seem to stand in their way. I'm sure an Orthodox would have pointed that out, and Joseph Smith eventually would probably become embarrassed about it. Necromancy, talking to the spirits of the dead. Well, after a while, the people that he communicated with weren't spirits anymore; they were resurrected, and he called them angels.
Yes, I know apologists,
and that's part of the evolution out of the earliest accounts was Martin Harris told people that the spirit of one of the authors of the book appeared to Joseph Smith in a dream 3 times. Well, the 3 times, was a kind of a magical number. And,
right.
So, yeah, there is this evolution away from talking to the dead.
I think apologists, they would try to state that, the early Christian, at the time of Joseph Smith, wouldn't have seen that their engagement in magic was sort of against Christianity or against the Bible. That some of them would have seen it as like sort of like they blended, God and the supernatural with magic was part of their worldview. Would that have been true for maybe just some Christians or all of them? Or because I'm sure there is, like you said, there is that divide that some sort of maybe condemned it or disagree with it.
Well, this is a real orthodox. This is an orthodox position. Okay, the average, what Quinn liked to use that's why he liked to use the term folk magic. It's the magic of the folks.
Of the people, yeah,
the people out there, and people like Barrett in his book The Magus. They intentionally tried to evoke good spirits, not evil spirits, good spirits, there was, of course, there were specters and haunted houses and things like that people feared, evil spirits. There was all that folklore also. But there was also good spirits that would appear and warn you, or dead relatives that would come and visit you to comfort you and things like that. So
they weren't trying to appeal to evil spirits, or they wouldn't have considered it of the devil or satanic that maybe some Orthodox Christians might.
The parchments that the Smith family handed down were called one of them's Holiness to the Lord parchment, but it has magical symbols on it. Some of them are directly from Scott's book, I forget the guy's first name, but there was another magic book. It was probably copied from these magic characters, but it also had Hebrew letters on it, Latin letters, and holiness to the Lord. So it was these are what I call Christian magicians. Now
Mm.
you'll have Orthodox today go, there's no such thing. Well, you know, I'm a historian. It's not my job. This is what I tell them. It's not my job to determine who's the real Christians and who are not the real Christians.
Yeah,
That's not my job as a historian.
no, that's a good
Okay.
point.
Yeah. So you guys go and argue about it. Go ahead. But according to the people that are the believers doing it, they didn't see themselves as satanic.
Yes.
To me, that's more important than
Yeah.
some purist definition of what a Christian is.
Yeah, they just would have seen it as it's all sort of supernatural, invisible forces, God, angels, and
Yeah,
all this magical stuff. Okay,
right.
so let's move on to when does Joseph Smith first obtain his seer stone? Which seer stone does he obtain first? Is it the one he gets at the Willard Chase property, or is it the one at, is it Lake Erie? I think there's a bit of
Yeah. And the
confusion over
white,
that.
the white stone, the brown stone. It's a little foggy even now, but the brown stone seems to have come from the well that Joseph Smith was helping. Joseph Smith and Alvin Smith were helping Willard Chase to dig a well on the Chase property.
1822? Is that the date?
1822.
Okay.
Yes.
So Joseph would have
So,
been six. Oh, I'm sorry. Was Joseph involved in treasure digging before this, with his family? So before he obtained the Seers note, he might have uh, joined his
yeah,
family in some treasure digging, but he wouldn't have led it up until this point. Would that be correct?
yes. Yeah, according to Quinn's reconstruction also, their earliest probably, but it's uncertain, would be 1819.
Okay.
And according to Pomeroy Tucker, who doesn't know what's going on until later, like Pomeroy Tucker published a book about the origin, progress of Mormonism, 1876. I think that's the date, 1876. Uh, Pomeroy Tucker was from Palmyra, and he was actually the foreman for publishing the Book of Mormon in 1830 and worked with Grandin in Grandin's printing office. I don't know if he knew the Smiths before that very well anyway. The Smiths used to live in town, in Palmyra, and then moved south on Stafford Road to the property and just over the border into Manchester Township. So these townships are like 6 miles square, and there's a village in each one. Palmyra Village is in Palmyra Township, 6 miles
Right.
square,
Okay,
kind of.
got you.
Uh, and Manchester is in Manchester Township, and they lived in Manchester Township, but not in Manchester Village.
Right.
Manchester Village was like a couple of miles south of that.
So would you
Uh,
consider him a unreliable or not a very reliable source of that first treasure digging
um,
account?
so you have to be skeptical somewhat because I'm not sure how well he was where he's getting his information. He says where he gets his information, a lot of it from the Lorenzo Saunders, um, Chase, the Chase family.
So
So
it's
he
kind of like
goes,
secondhand.
yeah, he's talking to them in some other places he probably never names, so some of it could be rumor, but um, so you kind of have to be skeptical. But the one thing that makes it a little skeptical, I think 1819 would be okay, but he has the it's a white stone, but it's shaped like a baby's foot. But the brownstone is sort of like that, supposedly. And uh, he seems to be he describes the white stone, the chase stone, as the white stone, shaped like a baby's foot, which is the white stone. But from what we can tell, the brown stone is the one that came from the well. So he might be
Yeah.
right about 1819 about the white stone.
So
So
possibly 1819 is when the white
yeah,
stone was
yeah. So how
obtained.
did he get the white stone? Well, according to uh, Lorenzo Saunders and some other sources, he looked into Sally Chase's stone. He asked to look in Sally Chase's stone, and then she let him, I guess. And he saw his stone,
Okay.
and it was down by Lake Erie. And he went on an errand and got his stone and came back with the stone. And then he gets the 1822 stone in the well. So as I reconstruct it, is that you want to have a stone that other people believe in, that's
That has
verified,
powers.
verified.
Yeah.
Well, he kind of went for a stone that was revealed to him in a magical way. It wasn't just haphazardly found. Like, oh, I found an unusual stone. Oh, it's a magic stone. Who's going to believe it? How many people are you going to convince of that? Not very many. So
Right.
if you look in Sally Chase's stone and you say, oh, I saw where my stone is supposed to be, a magical stone, and I had to go on this long journey to get it. I just didn't find it in the backyard while I was digging for soil to plant a tree in or something, or with something. Well, I had to go on a long journey, and it was on this near a weird river. It was near the Lake Erie, and so he got it. It was right where the magical stone said. So how could he have found the stone without any help? This unusual stone. So
Hmm.
he gets the stone, he comes back with it. So it has a degree of uh, magical story behind it, right? But I get the feeling that it just didn't quite convince a lot of people, and he's trying to compete against other seers too. And especially Sally Chase. Sally Chase seems to be the leader.
She's got a reputation.
Yeah. Um, so when he was digging the well, and actually the stone was discovered by Willard Chase, according to Willard Chase, he found the stone, unusual looking stone, down in the well, and when he brought it up, he go, oh, look at the stone. Well, then Joseph Smith said, well, let me see it. And he took the stone and he put it in his hat, and he looked at it and says, oh, I can see with this stone. Well, he's always already claimed that he was a seer with the other stone, but I can see with this stone. Well, and then Chase took the stone, of course, and it was in the Chase family. And then Joseph Smith went and asked to borrow it.
I think I remember that account.
Yeah. Well, this is Willard Chase. So the stone, he's always claimed the stone was his, not the Smiths, that they stole it from him.
Right.
Joseph came and borrowed it because he said he could find something with it. So he borrows a stone. And it's a stone that the Chase family has verified was a real stone.
It gives it
Even though,
credibility.
yeah, it has credibility. Although Willard Chase in his account says he only saw it as a curiosity. Well, he's trying to take the credibility out of the stone.
Yeah, downplay it.
Yeah, downplay it. Oh, it's just a curiosity, but it was mine, you know? And Joe Smith borrows it. He sees things with it. He's successful. He uses that stone, according to Martin Harris, to find the plates. Okay.
Yes, I remember that account.
Right. So when Joe Smith has the visitation of the angel in 1823, September 21st, 22nd, the night of, all he says in his later accounts is that the location was revealed to him. He doesn't say how. It was open up to his up to his mind or view of where the plates are. And Martin Harris says if it weren't for that stone, he would not have found the plates. So he uses the stone to actually find the exact location on the hill of where the plates are. And he goes to the hill and he finds them. Well, so he finds the plates. I'm going to skip the part what happens, but I'm going to trace the history of the stone.
Can I ask a question about?
He finds it. Okay, hold on.
Okay,
He finds the plates. He has to keep them there. He can't take them unless he takes Alvin the next year. But Alvin dies. He goes to the next year and he doesn't get the plates because he can't bring Alvin. And that's where I argue the story originally ended. Nothing after that. He wasn't able to fulfill it. Maybe he could find another person to take Alvin's place. Maybe not. It's left hanging. Okay. Well, then Alvin, because of Alvin's death, Lucy joins the Presbyterian Church, and there's the revival in Palmyra in the winter of 1824-25. And according to Willard Chase, Joseph Smith returned the stone to him during that time.
Okay.
He returned the stone, and I argue that he repented of his former ways.
Because isn't there an account that is it Oliver Carter or Martin Harris says that the angel Joseph tried to obtain the plates and he couldn't, and the angel said that you haven't kept the commandments of the Lord, and was pretty much telling him to repent. And
yeah, that's all like later because he didn't do everything just right. Well, that element's there all the time because it's magical. He didn't do everything just right. He didn't bring Alvin. Okay, he didn't bring Alvin. The angel, the spirit had tricked him.
Right, because you can see the connections and the seeds of the angel and the gold plate story. It's very similar to a spirit guarding treasure, and you have to sort of like appease that spirit and engage in maybe different like rituals, so to speak, to obtain it. In a similar way,
be
pass
very
the
exact.
test.
You be very exact.
Right.
That's why the treasure slips away, because you didn't say the words right. You didn't, you didn't circle around the right amount of times. Some sort of thing happened that wasn't just right, and the spirit was allowed into the circle. So the circle that they draw, remember Lucy saying drawing magic circles and soothsaying? Well, that's what she's talking about. You draw a circle, and sometimes you put 12 stakes in the ground for the 12 tribes of Israel.
And Luman Walters, he did that, didn't he? When that was
he drew a circle with a rusty sword.
Okay.
He had a sword, and he would draw a circle in the ground. Then he would take a Latin book and read Latin as he's circling the circle to keep the evil spirit out of the circle.
And when did he come to Palmyra, or it was Manchester? Was it in 1823?
Well, he lived pretty close. He lived pretty close to Manchester, down in Yates County. And I know exactly where he lived, but it's on old maps. But he got hired because he had quite a reputation. He was a doctor. On his tombstone is one of those things that crushes, a pistol and whatever, the bull that crushes medicine, is on his tombstone. So, and someone in Fayette even knew about him and talked about hiring Walters, the magician. So he came up. He was hired by Willard Chase and Alvin Smith for $1, $1 a day, I think it was, or something like that. $3 a day. I forget it.
It's okay.
Getting this information from Lorenzo Saunders, 1884 interview with Kelly, William Kelly, and Edmund Kelly of the Reorganized Church went and interviewed Lorenzo Saunders a few times, and Benjamin Saunders once. Lorenzo Saunders about 3 times, and wrote it and rewrote it. And they have these really long interviews of Lorenzo Sanders, and it's in my early Mormon document books. Everything I'm talking about is in those books.
Read those books, listeners.
Every document that I'm mentioning is in those books. Okay.
Yeah.
So uh, so Walter's magician was hired by Willard Chase, and but they fired him after they couldn't get the treasure. They fired him, and this is where Abner Cole, who owned that hill, right, talked. And Lorenzo Saunders talks about that Joseph Smith Sr. actually went when Joseph Smith took over.
So
Joseph
did
Smith
Joseph
took
Smith,
over.
did he meet Luman Walters? And
Oh, no doubt. I
yeah,
think he met him and liked his style.
so you think he
And
learned from him?
well, the style that, so you have different magicians and different money diggers. You have people that are just digging money, that don't use magic or incantations or anything like it. They just dig. They hear rumors. They search out. They might use a rod, but because they believe it has a scientific principle behind it, and they might dig. But no one tries to control the spirits. Yeah, they're out there digging, but only a few people out there are actually connecting the practice with evil spirits, making the treasure move away as an explanation for not getting it.
Why you can't
So,
obtain it?
so the rod works, but instead of saying, when they dig and don't find anything, instead of saying, well, the rod really doesn't work, they have to explain the failure somehow. Just like psychics today try to explain failures. Like there was like Uri Geller at one point would be on TV. He was from Israel, and he was a psychic, and he would bend spoons. Remember the famous guy bending spoons?
Mm.
And when he failed, he always had an explanation that it was bad vibrations from skeptics in the room.
Right.
Yeah, he was on Johnny Carson and totally failed. Johnny Carson was a magician, amateur magician in his early years. And he was advised by James Randi, sometimes called the Amazing Randi, to supply his own spoon, his own whatever Uri Geller needed. Uri Geller failed, okay, on TV, and he blamed the bad vibes of vibrations coming from skeptics in the room. It doesn't work quite as well.
This is similar to saying maybe if a blessing or a prophecy doesn't come true because it's the lack of faith or worthiness of,
or it was conditional.
People. Conditional, yeah, conditional upon
it was
faith.
a conditional prophecy, that kind of a thing. So
right,
there's always the way to word things where it's called a double out, which is you always word your predictions in a way that can be explained away, or multiple explanations. And it's vague enough that the person receiving the reading can attach various meanings to it. And then it's fulfilled. And that's called subjective validation, meaning the validation of the prophecy is subjective. And it's worded in a certain way that it can have many fulfillments, not just one.
Got you.
Not so
specific.
exact. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and they learn, psychics learn to do it that way. So anyway, what were we talking about?
So Luman Walters. So did Joseph Smith around this time? So 1823. Would he have had a reputation at that time of, being a seer, and people claim that he could find lost objects? I think
in 1823, he was just a beginner then.
Just starting
right?
out.
He only had that stone he claimed he had. He may have worked the rod like his father. There's always an excuse why things don't succeed. And just like there are today, people still believe despite problems with belief. They have to nuance, or they have to do this or that. they're the same way. I think there's a degree of sincerity with the Smiths. I think
Yeah.
especially Joseph Smith Sr. is a sincere believer in rods and seer stones. I think there's a strain of that. Um, there's also frauds mixed in there. There's some people that may have actual gifts, like the rod works, or the seer stone. They see things in their mind's eye using the seer stone, and that come true, and other things do not come true, and they explain them away, and or you and they themselves forget, like people have dreams that come true. Well, they
Yeah.
have probably 100 that didn't, that they forgot about, and they remembered the one dream that was so remarkably and it came true. Well, Smiths were no different, and people at that time are no different. They latch on to the ones that actually happen, and they're sincere, even though all the time they have explanations like slippery treasures for when it doesn't come true. you know um so they're not there, but and in the mix to them there are people that are tempted to use fraud, especially when they're getting money, um to try to make sure it does come true, because you
Hmm.
can't always count on it
Yeah.
happening.
Bolster their claims.
Yeah, so like I mentioned what I mentioned, Ransard Rogers had his technique. He probably wasn't sincere at any time, you know. But there's some people that are sincere, and they're tempted to use deception on occasion in
Hmm.
order for their reputation to outdistance the
Others.
other, the other
Right.
seers.
There's competition.
And I believe Joe Smith was that kind, that he was in competition, and at this point in his life, he wanted to be the best seer, the most famous seer, the most successful seer in his neighborhood. He wasn't thinking of Harmony, Pennsylvania or anything, he's just thinking of right there, just being the best. He's competing,
So is
you
it
know.
is it between 1823 to 1825 when he's engaging in a lot of treasure digging in his area and people claiming that he can find lost objects or tools or whatever it is, and that he has this gift to see things. I think Lucy says like invisible to the natural eye. And
Yeah,
I think there's accounts of Martin Harris, him saying that Joseph Smith found a pin in, he put the seer stone in a hat, they couldn't find it, and then he claims to
yeah,
find pin in, in a haystack, literally finding a needle in a haystack. So people, his family members and neighbors, believed he did have this gift to
yeah.
see in the stone.
Well, just like psychics today, uh, you won't learn of their failures. You only hear of the successes, and they don't have to do that themselves. Their followers do it for them, and certain things become legendary. And how do you explain this? And it's almost impossible to explain something. Some things are coincidence. One of the things about humans is that they can't accurately judge coincidence. They don't realize how often coincidence happens. Especially when humans themselves are meaning making machines.
Yeah, we want to attach meaning
Yeah,
to
we
everything.
normally see patterns. We normally see patterns. We make patterns out of chaos, right? And we become blind to the actual chaos that is going on because it's too stressful, right?
Mm.
So we automatically see patterns. We're pattern making machines, meaning making machines. Um, so history is the same way. So I guarantee you, Joseph Smith had a lot of failures that are just totally lost to history. And the successes are remembered. And you have Martin Harris at the end of his life looking back, and not only, we write history and we tell stories for the present. And this is how memory works, actually, is that you reconstitute these memories every time you tell them, and you tell them in such a way, and you actually becomes the memory. You know, it's not that you're purposely changing things, but when you retell the story later in life, and it becomes more and more fantastic, and the story becomes a formula, right? There's a formula in telling this story, and it becomes more and more clean and more miraculous and more, formulaic. And when Martin Harris is telling these stories later in life, he doesn't want to appear to be a fool or credulous. He wants to say, and I had all the proof in the world to believe this. That's what that's the subtext sometimes of what the story he's telling. Same thing about seeing Joe Smith, Emma telling stories of, oh, and he corrected my spelling. Well, he may have corrected her spelling about a proper name on occasion, but if you look at the actual manuscript, there's plenty of misspellings in the actual manuscripts. So he wasn't correcting everybody's spelling.
Yeah. Okay.
He may have said, that choriantimer, it doesn't have an E in it,
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching this interview with Dan Vogel. In part 2, we'll be looking at Joseph Smith's involvement in treasure digging, the 1826 glass liquor trial, and the angel and the gold plates. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like, please share and subscribe to my channel. If you care to donate, you can to my PayPal, stephen.murphy1996@outlook.com, and you can get in contact with me on my Facebook page, Mormonism with the Murph. Check out Dan Vogel's YouTube channel and his books that are in the link in this video, and I will see you on part 2. Thanks, everybody.